I want you to imagine a 6-year-old girl. She's standing outside this, like, really heavy stone lodge on the absolute summit of a mountain.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. It's a brisk morning, and without any warning at all, she just picks up a rock and hurls it directly through one of these massive glass windows.
Oh, wow. Just shatters it.
Completely shatters it, glass everywhere. And, when the adults inevitably rush over and demand to know why she just vandalized the state park, she doesn't cry.
Let me guess, she blames an imaginary friend.
Exactly. She doesn't make up a story about, like, a bird flying into it. She looks them dead in the eye and says she was throwing stones at a ghost.
Which is, I mean, that's a fairly standard thing a panicked kid might invent, right? You just blame the invisible monster so you don't get in trouble.
Right. You'd completely expect her to describe, I don't know, a cartoon sheet with holes cut out or some generic scary monster, but she doesn't do that.
What does she say?
She describes a tall, bald man with his hands outstretched. And to prove what she saw, this 6-year-old child, who, by the way, has never had a single day of martial arts training in her entire life, she stretches her arms out.
Okay.
But then she stops. She frowns, and she says, "No, not really like this, more like this." And then she flawlessly executes a highly specific, mechanically complex opening Tai Chi maneuver.
Which is just, I mean, that's a physical movement she couldn't possibly know.
Yeah.
Especially since she was mimicking an action that had taken place in that exact spot just moments before she arrived by someone she literally couldn't have seen.
It is an absolute record scratch moment. And welcome to this deep dive. Today we are taking you to Charlotte, Vermont.
Specifically to a geographical anomaly known as Mount Philo State Park.
Yeah. If you look at a tourist brochure, it's just this beautiful spot in the Champlain Valley. It's known for sweeping autumn foliage views. But we are definitely not here for the hiking tips today.
No, we are diving into a deeply documented, highly unusual, and honestly beautifully strange set of phenomena taking place right at that summit.
So our source material for this exploration is drawn from this really thoroughly compiled document. It's titled The Tai Chi Ghost of Mount Philo State Park.
It's a remarkable aggregation of data, really. It pulls together historical records, deep indigenous cosmology, and perhaps most compellingly, these incredibly detailed firsthand accounts from credible, on-the-ground state park officials.
Right. The mission for this deep dive is to basically figure out what happens when you throw 3 very different ingredients into a blender. We've got ancient geographical anomalies, 1930s architectural design, and highly focused modern human intention.
We are going to explore how those elements combine to create an environment where the boundary between our ordinary, predictable world and the totally unexplained gets, well, incredibly thin.
And we want to figure out what it actually means when a haunting isn't something out of a horror movie. Like, what happens when a haunting is actually curious and participatory and genuinely warm?
It forces us to completely reevaluate the mechanics of human energy. I mean, we're going to look at evidence that directly challenges our basic, everyday assumptions about how space and time operate.
Yeah, and how the physical environments we inhabit might actually be recording us. So if you are listening to this, I can promise you that this deep dive is tailored exactly for you.
Absolutely.
I know you love looking at things from multiple angles, pulling at the threads of a mystery until the seemingly unrelated facts suddenly snap together into that aha moment.
And we want to assure you right out of the gate, this is not your typical spooky campfire ghost story meant to give you cheap jump scares.
Not at all. We are taking a grounded, analytical, and physical look at energy. This is a mystery that is going to fundamentally challenge how you think about the physical spaces around you every single day.
Because the core premise we have to accept, or at least entertain, is that space is never just empty space. It is a container. It has properties.
Right.
And to understand what happened with that little girl, the shattered window, and the Tai Chi ghost, we really have to first understand the physical container where all of this played out.
Let's lay out the stage then, because the mountain itself and the lodge sitting on top of it, they're basically active characters in this narrative. Let's talk geography.
Right, so Mount Philo is an isolated summit. It rises 968 feet above the relatively flat floor of the Champlain Valley.
And that isolation is really key, right?
It is. When you picture a mountain, you usually picture a rolling ridgeline or a massive jagged range like the Rockies where peaks just blend into one another. But Mount Philo is what geologists call a monadnock.
A monadnock, so it's basically alone.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's an isolated, standalone protrusion of hard rock that somehow resisted the glacial erosion that flattened all the rest of the valley around it. It just abruptly punches up out of the earth.
So when you stand on the summit, You are really visually commanding the landscape. You look out over the vast expanse of Lake Champlain to the west, and you can see all the way across the water to the towering Adirondack Mountains of New York.
It's a dramatic spot. And because of that drama, it holds a really special legal and cultural status. I mean,
Mm.
it was donated to the state in 1924, which actually makes it Vermont's very first state park.
Wow, first one. People have obviously always recognized there is something special about this specific lump of rock. But the really crucial piece of our stage-like, the actual architecture of the mystery, was built about a decade later during the Great Depression.
Right, between 1935 and 1936, when the Civilian Conservation Corps arrived.
The CCC, this was Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal program,
Yeah,
right?
it was designed to provide manual labor jobs related to the conservation and development of natural resources in rural lands.
And it's so worth thinking about the psychology of the men who built this place. The CCC brought legions of young, unemployed, usually unmarried men out into the wilderness.
Many of these guys were from the city. They were used to concrete, bread lines, city grids.
Yeah, and suddenly they are transported to an isolated Vermont summit surrounded by just dense forest and sky, and they are handed heavy tools. Their primary task was to build a summit lodge.
And the physical labor involved here is staggering. I mean, they didn't just order a bunch of pre-cut lumber and truck it up the mountain,
No, they were instructed to build the lodge out of local Vermont quartzite.
which is the exact same stone that Mount Philo itself is made of.
That detail absolutely fascinates me. Quartzite isn't just any stone. It is an incredibly hard, non-foliated metamorphic rock. So these young men are up there day after day, hand chiseling, cracking, and shaping the literal flesh and bone of the mountain.
Right. They are literally pulling the mountain apart to build a structure on top of the mountain. It's an architectural recursion.
And they built this beautiful, imposing structure. It features a massive central stone fireplace, which acts as the heavy heart of the building.
And it has these sweeping vaulted ceilings with heavy timber beams, and then, this is important, these huge, heavy glass windows that face directly outward toward the lake.
So I'm trying to picture the vibe of this place. If you've got thick stone walls, but massive glass windows looking at a huge lake, is it fair to say this building is acting like a giant doorway or a boundary point?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you're trapped in this heavy rock cave, but you're also like visually falling out into the open sky.
You've just perfectly described what architectural psychologists and even spiritual historians refer to as a threshold space or a liminal space.
Let's dig into that liminality. What does it actually mean in practice for the people standing inside it?
Well, a threshold space is an environment that exists permanently in transition. It is the space between spaces. Think about your experience inside that lodge. The heavy enclosing quartzite roots you firmly inside the earth, right?
Right. It feels dark and protective.
Exactly. It is dense. But simultaneously, the upward-reaching vaulted ceilings pull your spatial awareness up. And those massive windows completely dissolve the boundary between the interior room and the vast sweeping exterior.
So you were experiencing enclosure and infinite expanse at the exact same time.
You're indoors and outdoors.
Yeah.
You're grounded and flying. You are neither one thing nor the other.
That sounds like it would kind of mess with your head.
It does. Your brain actually stops enforcing the normal, rigid boundaries of physical reality. And in paranormal research, investigators consistently note that threshold spaces are the most highly active environments for unusual phenomena.
Because the physical boundaries are loosened, so the psychological and maybe energetic boundaries are naturally loosened as well.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense on a psychological level. But I want to take it a step further into the actual physics of the building. Let's talk about the quartzite itself, because quartzite is metamorphosed quartz sandstone. It is highly crystalline.
Extremely. It's essentially a massive network of interlocking quartz crystals that have been fused together under immense heat and pressure.
Right. And we know from basic electronics that quartz crystals are highly active. I mean, we use them in watches to keep time. We use them in radios to conduct and regulate frequencies.
Yeah, there is a whole scientific concept called the piezoelectric effect. If you apply mechanical stress to a quartz crystal, it actually generates a small electrical charge. It translates physical pressure into electricity.
Wait, really?
Yes, and conversely, an electrical charge can cause the crystal to physically vibrate. It is a highly conductive resonant material.
So think about this analogy. If you take an acoustic guitar, the wooden body of the guitar is a resonator. You pluck a tiny string, and the specific geometry of the wood catches that tiny vibration, bounces it around, and amplifies it so you can hear it across the room.
Right.
Are we basically looking at a situation where the CCC workers inadvertently built a massive geological acoustic guitar?
It's a very compelling hypothesis.
Mm.
I mean, if you treat the lodge not just as a shelter, but as a crystalline resonator, then anything that happens inside that lodge, any vibration, any intense human emotion, any focused energy, isn't just absorbed into dead drywall.
It interacts with the walls.
Exactly. It interacts with the crystalline matrix of the walls. It bounces around. It is potentially amplified by the geometry of those vaulted ceilings.
So the lodge is a battery, a giant hand-chiseled quartz battery sitting right on the boundary between earth and sky. That is the anatomy of our sacred space.
But a battery doesn't do anything unless you charge it.
Right. Which brings us to the events immediately preceding the little girl seeing the ghost. Let's look at exactly what filled that geological sponge.
To understand the charge, we really have to introduce our primary witness to the subsequent events. The man who chronicled all of this, Ranger John Frigault.
And I really want to emphasize his credibility here because that is so important. When we hear stories about floating ghosts, we usually picture a team of hobbyist ghost hunters creeping around an abandoned asylum at midnight, actively trying to scare themselves.
Right, with night vision cameras. But that is not what we have here. Not at all. John Frigault is a seasoned park management professional. He is practical. He is outdoors oriented.
He's a guy who works with his hands in the dirt.
Precisely. His daily life revolves around tangible, physical realities. Clearing fallen trees, managing state budgets, fixing trail erosion, and dealing with tourists who forgot their bug spray.
And crucially, his testimony isn't some whispered rumor overheard at a local diner. He documented this. He published his account publicly under his own name on the official Vermont State Parks blog in October 2013.
He literally put his state pension and his professional reputation on the line to tell this story.
You don't do that unless you are absolutely convinced of what you saw, and unless the reality of it is so profound you just can't keep it to yourself. So we need to listen very closely to the exact sequence of events he describes leading up to the incident, because the setup is essentially a recipe for a massive energetic surge.
It begins the day before the little girl throws the stone.
Right. An 80-person yoga group rents the summit of Mount Philo. 80 people.
That's a huge group for that space.
It is. And they ascend the mountain and hold a highly focused, high-energy practice session, complete with nature prayers, right there on the summit, interacting with the lodge.
Let's just pause and unpack the sheer volume of human intention occurring in that moment. I mean, human beings operate on biological and electrical rhythms.
Sure.
When 80 individuals gather in a singular location, synchronizing their breath, physically exerting themselves, focusing their mind on unified concepts like nature or peace, they are generating a massive amount of collective effervescence.
It's like a stadium concert, but instead of directing the energy at a rock band, they are directing it at the mountain. They are projecting focused human chi, or life force, right into our crystalline quartz battery.
They saturated the site with highly organized human intention. But the human energy was only the first half of the equation.
Right, because that very afternoon, the atmosphere decides to show up and match that energy. A massive Champlain Valley summer storm sweeps through the area.
And the sources are very careful to note that this wasn't just a gentle rain shower to cool things off.
No, we are talking about severe tornado warnings, torrential driving rain, extremely high violent winds. It was the kind of sweeping, violent storm that physically alters the environment.
Anyone who has lived through a severe summer storm knows the feeling right after it passes. The air feels fundamentally different.
Yes, it's crisp. It almost smells metallic.
That's ozone. A severe thunderstorm brings radical drops in barometric pressure. It brings intense electromagnetic friction as the cloud layers grind against each other.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it generates massive amounts of static electricity and ionization. The storm literally washed the atmosphere clean of particulate matter and left behind a sharp, highly energized, crackling cold front. The air itself was electrically charged.
I am so fascinated by the sequence here. I'm trying to wrap my head around the physics of it. Let's think about this. What if nature essentially hit the reset and amplify button on the mountain?
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
Because the human activity, the 80 people doing yoga and praying, that laid down the code. It saturated the resonant space of the lodge with focused intention. And then a few hours later, the thunderstorm provides 1,000,000 volts of atmospheric electricity. It's like the yoga group plugged a hard drive into the mountain, and the storm flipped the power switch to turn the whole system on.
That is a very effective way to conceptualize it. You have the energetic catalyst of the storm interacting with the localized emotional and spiritual residue. The barometric pressure drops, which we know affects human psychology and biology. I mean, it can cause headaches, anxiety, or altered states of perception. Combine that pressure shift with the natural piezoelectric properties of the quartzite lodge, getting battered by wind and rain. The environment was vibrating at a completely altered frequency that night.
So the stage is set, the battery is fully charged, the air is literally crackling. Which brings us to the morning after the storm. The air is cold, the sky is clear, and into this highly charged, freshly washed environment walks Ranger Frigault.
He is just showing up for work.
Exactly. He has his coffee. He is completely unaware that his totally normal morning routine is about to shatter reality.
Frigault enters the stone lodge alone. He likes to use the space before the park opens to the public to center himself.
He starts his day with a series of sun salutations to warm up his body, stretching, breathing, and then he transitions into his daily Tai Chi form.
For those who aren't familiar, he's doing these incredibly slow, deliberate, flowing martial arts postures.
Yeah. And he's doing this alone, inside the stone building, standing right in front of one of those massive glass windows, looking outward over the expansive view of Lake Champlain.
Right.
He goes through his whole routine, finishes up, feels centered, and heads back down to the contact station at the park entrance to officially start his workday.
It is the absolute definition of a mundane, routine morning for him, until the visitors arrive.
Shortly after he gets to his desk at the contact station, two mothers march up to him, and they are dragging 4 young girls with them, ranging in age from about 5 to 8 years old.
Oh boy.
The mothers are visibly furious and apologetic, and the kids look terrified. It turns out 2 of the girls had been throwing large stones at the lodge. They actually managed to hurl a rock right through the glass, completely shattering it.
It's a classic park management headache.
Yeah.
Kids being destructive, parents forcing them to take responsibility.
Exactly. The mothers are doing the right thing. They brought the kids to face the authority figure, admit what they did, and figure out how to pay for it. So Frigault leans over his desk, looks at the kids, and asks the standard question, why did you do it?
And this is the moment the mundane reality of park management completely fractures.
A little 6-year-old girl with blonde hair and brown eyes steps slightly forward. She admits she was the one who initiated the stone throwing. Frigault asks why, and she says, very matter-of-factly, that she did it because she saw a ghost floating in the window.
Now, any adult in that situation assumes the child is lying to avoid punishment, or maybe she saw a reflection of a tree branch and panicked. So Frigault presses her. He asks her to describe exactly what she saw.
And she is incredibly specific. She doesn't describe a ghost from a cartoon. She says the ghost was a tall, bald figure, and she says he had his hands outstretched.
And then she tries to demonstrate.
Yeah, she stretches her own little arms straight out in front of her, but then she stops. She realizes it doesn't feel right. She says out loud, not really like this, more like this.
And this is where the sheer statistical impossibility of the event crystallizes.
She shifts her weight, alters the angle of her arms, and precisely, mechanically executes a complex opening Tai Chi maneuver.
We have to really analyze the weight of that action. A 6-year-old child with absolutely zero martial arts training does not accidentally invent and execute a flawless Tai Chi posture while trying to mime a generic spooky ghost.
Especially not right outside the exact same window where a tall, bald park ranger had just been practicing that exact same form maybe 30 minutes earlier.
The mirroring is undeniable, and you can see the profound psychological impact this has on Frigault. Imagine the cognitive dissonance.
Right, because he is a practical man.
Exactly. His brain is trying to process the impossibility of what this small child is demonstrating. His logical worldview is colliding with an impossible data point.
So what does he do? Because frankly, if a kid did that to me, I think I would have to sit down and put my head between my knees.
He does what many of us do when faced with something that breaks our reality. He retreats to the safety of routine and authority.
Oh, interesting.
He completely dismisses it. He tells the kids they have to work off the debt of the broken window by picking up storm debris and branches around the park. He literally puts them to work to distract himself from the implications of what just happened.
Okay, but I have to play the skeptic here for a minute. My logical brain is clawing at the walls trying to find a normal explanation.
Let's hear it.
Is it at all possible that Frigault was just practicing his Tai Chi in the window, and the little girl was wandering around the summit early, saw him through the glass, got spooked by this bald guy doing slow-motion stretches in a dark stone building, and mistakenly thought he was a monster?
It is absolutely the most logical first assumption. You have to rule out mundane observation. However, the timeline established in the sources and the specific nature of her description strongly complicate that theory.
How so?
Well, Frigault had entirely finished his practice, locked up the lodge, and walked all the way down to the contact station well before the families arrived at the summit.
So the timeline doesn't match up for a direct line of sight.
Exactly. Furthermore, the specific language the child used is crucial. She didn't say she saw a weird man standing in the building. She specifically described the figure as floating.
Okay, if we rule out that she saw him in real time, flesh and blood, what are the alternative theories? What did she see? Because I'm thinking about two wild possibilities here.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, could the ghost actually be a localized time slip? Like the atmospheric pressure and the quartz battery somehow bent the local space-time, and for 5 seconds, the little girl looked in the window and literally saw 30 minutes into the past.
A temporal anomaly. That's the idea that highly charged environments can cause momentary ripples or overlaps in chronological time. It's a prevalent theory in quantum-leaning paranormal research.
Or what if we lean back into our acoustic guitar crystalline battery analogy? What if it wasn't a rip in time, but an energetic recording?
Oh, I see where you're going.
We talked about Tai Chi being the manipulation of Chi, or life force. What if Frigault's intense focus, combined with the extreme electrical charge of the storm and the conductive quartz, created a sort of psychic photograph?
Like screen burn-in on an old cathode ray tube television monitor.
Yes, exactly. He leaves the room, but the energetic imprint of his action is so strong it just hangs there in the threshold space of the window frame.
So the little girl didn't see a dead spirit. She saw the residual, energetic echo of Frigault's living, breathing action suspended in the air.
Right. It's an incredibly elegant theory.
It really is. It suggests that human action, especially a practice like Tai Chi, which is explicitly designed to manipulate environmental energy, can leave a temporary three-dimensional impression in a highly charged matrix. It turns the concept of a ghost from a trapped soul into an environmental recording.
It makes so much sense. It explains why the ghost was doing exactly what he did. But of course, Frigault couldn't process it in the moment, so he sent the kids off to pick up sticks.
Right.
If the story ended right there, we could maybe, just maybe, write it off as an incredibly weird coincidence. Or a child's hyperactive imagination catching a trick of the light.
But the environment was not finished releasing that stored energy.
No, it wasn't. Because the mountain quickly proved it wasn't just doing parlor tricks with visual hallucinations, which shifts the phenomenon from something subjective that you can easily dismiss to something completely undeniable in the physical world. Let's talk about the physical manifestation.
A visual impression, like a psychic photograph, requires very little actual force. It's just light and perception. But to move physical objects in our material world requires a completely different magnitude of energetic force.
Right, it requires kinetic output. You need actual joules of energy to fight gravity.
Exactly.
So here's what happens next. Frigault obviously needs to clean up the shattered glass before someone gets hurt. He grabs his maintenance tools, a hammer, a scraper to get the putty out, a towel, a dustpan, and an old-school cob broom.
And he heads back up to the lodge with another park staff member, a guy named Adam.
They enter the space and they get to work. It's just two guys doing manual labor. Adam is sweeping up the large shards of glass from the stone floor, and Frigault is working on removing the broken shards from the heavy wooden window frame.
At one point, Frigault realizes there are millions of tiny glass splinters everywhere, and a broom isn't going to cut it. He tells Adam he needs to go fetch a shop vacuum.
So he leaves Adam alone in the center of the lodge for just a few minutes.
A brief, critical separation.
When Frigault finally returns with the vacuum, he walks through the door and Adam has stopped working. Adam is standing dead center in the middle of the massive room. And Frigault specifically notes in his report that Adam is ashen-faced.
All the blood has completely drained from his head.
Right. He looks like he is about to physically pass out. Frigault asks him what's wrong, and Adam explains that while he was sweeping the floor, the physical reality of the room just broke.
He says that while he was moving the cob broom across the stone, the handle suddenly stiffened in his hands. He felt a distinct physical resistance, as if someone or something else had firmly grabbed hold of the other end of the handle.
Imagine the visceral terror of that moment. You are performing a mindless task, pushing a broom, and suddenly the broom fights back. It exerts an opposing force.
So Adam does what anyone would do. He lets go. He pulls his hands back and scrambles away.
But the broom doesn't clatter to the stone floor. It remains standing completely upright on its bristles. And here's the detail that proves this isn't just a balancing trick. Adam says it wasn't just resting on the floor, it was standing slightly off the floor.
Wait, it was hovering.
It was hovering, and it stayed like that for about a full minute.
That means it was being actively held in place by an invisible anti-gravitational force. And Adam, despite being terrified, has the incredibly modern instinct to pull out his smartphone.
Thank God for the smartphone generation. He pulls it out, and he actually films the broom hovering there. He captures the physical, undeniable evidence.
But then we encounter a hallmark mechanism of paranormal phenomena.
Oh, this is the craziest part. When Adam goes to excitedly show the video to Frigault, he hits a wall, he pulls the phone out, and it's completely dead. The screen is black.
Completely dead.
Yes, the battery, which Adam knew for an absolute fact was fully charged just moments before this incident, is completely inexplicably drained to 0%.
We have to unpack the thermodynamics of this moment because it is crucial to understanding the H-W of these events. In deep paranormal research, catastrophic battery drain is one of the most frequently reported anomalies.
Why? Is the ghost just trying to hide the evidence so it doesn't end up on YouTube?
While that's a funny thought, the prevailing scientific theory regarding these anomalies is based on energy conversion. If an entity, or a concentrated energetic anomaly, wishes to manifest in our dense physical reality, specifically if it wants to exert kinetic force against the constant pull of Earth's gravity, it requires a massive power source.
Right. It cannot create energy from nothing. That violates the laws of physics.
Exactly. It must draw it from the surrounding environment.
So it has to pull juice from somewhere to do the heavy lifting.
Precisely.
Mm.
To hold a physical object like a cob broom upright and slightly elevated requires measurable physical work. The lithium-ion battery in Adam's phone was the most readily available, highly concentrated, easily accessible power source in that room.
Oh, wow.
The chemical potential energy stored in that battery was essentially cannibalized by the environment. The phenomenon drained the phone to sustain the anti-gravitational effect on the broom.
That is mind-blowing. If we go back to our tech analogy, it's like the lodge at that exact moment was operating as a localized, intense magnetic field.
It really was.
If the ghost the little girl saw is made of pure, raw life energy, of course it's going to suck a lithium-ion battery completely dry when it decides it wants to manipulate physical matter. It's just following the path of least electrical resistance.
And the physical evidence was right there in front of Frigault. The broom is back on the floor, the phone is dead, and his employee is pale with shock. Furthermore, Frigault, ever the practical skeptic, tries to replicate the anomaly. He walks over, picks up the cob broom, and repeatedly tries to balance it perfectly upright on its bristles by himself.
And it falls over instantly, every single time. He cannot recreate the physics of what Adam saw. Frigault writes in his own official public account that this realization gave him massive goosebumps and that the whole thing was profoundly freaky.
You have a seasoned, pragmatic park ranger openly admitting that the physical reality of his environment has just been broken.
And yet, as compelling as Adam's experience and the dead phone are, there is one final piece of evidence regarding this broom that elevates the story from a weird, isolated anomaly to a verified, ongoing environmental condition.
The independent corroboration.
This is the kicker. Years later, when Frigault finally decides to publish his full account of these events on the Vermont State Parks blog in 2013, an anonymous user drops into the comment section.
And this isn't just a troll, right?
No, this person posts twice with very specific details to say that they had been hiking at Mount Philo roughly 1 to 2 months prior to Frigault's broken window incident.
A completely independent witness with no connection to the park staff or the yoga group.
Exactly. This hiker writes that they were at the summit, the lodge was locked and empty, and they peered through that exact same massive glass window. And sitting right there in the empty room, they clearly saw the cob broom standing perfectly upright on its bristles all by itself.
We cannot overstate how completely that anonymous comment changes the narrative architecture of this entire mystery.
How so? Because to me, it just confirms Adam wasn't lying.
Well, it does that, yes, but it does something much larger. If the broom incident only happened once, with Adam immediately following the yoga group and the massive thunderstorm, you could logically argue that it was an isolated, freak energetic surge.
A one-time glitch in the matrix caused by a unique atmospheric cocktail.
Right. A lightning strike of weirdness. But the commenter proves that this was an isolated incident. The broom standing on its own had been happening unobserved for months prior to the storm.
Oh, I see.
It proves that the lodge wasn't just experiencing a temporary glitch. It possessed an ongoing, sustained environmental condition. The threshold space was persistently active, even when no one was around to look at it.
It's like the room has its own heartbeat. It makes it totally impossible for anyone listening right now to just comfortably write this off. You can't say Adam just had a weird muscle spasm.
No, you
You
can't.
can't say the little girl just saw a funny shadow. We have the physical manipulation of matter, we have measurable battery drain, and we have completely independent witnesses seeing the exact same impossible physics months apart.
And as we widen our lens, we discover that this deeply active energy isn't just neatly trapped inside the four heavy stone walls of the lodge. It isn't just playing tricks with park cleaning supplies and dead cell phones.
What?
The historical sources and ongoing reports reveal that the phenomena actually spill out across the entire 168-acre summit of the mountain.
Which brings us to the broader ecosystem of the park. Because Mount Philo isn't just a spooky building. It's an entire landscape of weirdness. And it affects everyday visitors in deeply personal, surprisingly beautiful ways.
Let's look beyond the lodge. The most fascinating reports come from the public events. The lodge, despite, or perhaps because of its unique atmosphere, is an incredibly highly sought-after venue for public ceremonies, specifically weddings and memorial services.
Right, and you have multiple people, event organizers, who work up there constantly, reporting that the space fundamentally feels inhabited.
Well, they always follow that up by using words like welcoming or warm.
It's never creepy. During weddings, vendors report that the decorative candles will burn unusually bright, far beyond their normal chemical capacity. Or a candle will suddenly extinguish when there is absolutely no draft in the heavy stone room and then inexplicably relight itself moments later.
Musicians and audio technicians also frequently note that the acoustic properties of the room seem to fluctuate wildly during highly emotional ceremonies.
Really? Like the sound changes?
Yes, it's as if the resonant properties of the quartz we discussed earlier are actively adjusting to the emotional frequency of the room.
It's almost like the space itself is actively participating in the event. The room is listening and it's responding. But the absolute craziest detail from a ceremony has to be the report from a wedding couple about the third set of footsteps.
Oh, this is a widely circulated account among the park staff. A bride, a groom, and their officiant were standing in the space, finalizing their vows.
And the couple explicitly reports hearing a distinct heavy third set of footsteps walking on the stone floor right alongside them, matching their pace perfectly.
It's just matching them step for step.
And yeah, when they walked slowly down the aisle, the invisible footsteps walked with them. When they stopped at the altar, the footsteps stopped. When they shifted their weight, the footsteps shifted.
Now, you were joking earlier about horror tropes, but really think about the reality of that moment.
Oh, I guarantee you, if I am standing at the altar on my wedding day, and I hear a heavy, invisible pair of boots walk up and stop right next to me, I am either assuming it's my mother-in-law coming to finally object, or I am sprinting out the nearest door. The wedding is off.
And that would be the completely natural human reaction. But that is the defining paradox of Mount Philo. The couple didn't run. They reported feeling a deep sense of calm.
That's wild.
And this participatory nature extends far out onto the dirt hiking trails as well. Hikers on the moderate 1.6-mile summit trail consistently report a highly specific shared sensation.
The parallel presence.
Yes, these are everyday hikers, many of whom are tourists with absolutely no prior knowledge of any ghost stories or strange history associated with the park.
Right.
Yet they consistently approach the rangers to describe feeling a distinct entity moving with them through the dense trees.
They say it stays off the trail, just inside the woodline. It keeps perfect pace with them as they hike, but crucially, it never approaches them, it never blocks their path, and it never ever feels threatening.
I want to really dig into the biology of why that is so strange. From an evolutionary perspective, human beings are hardwired for survival.
Sure.
If you are walking alone in a dense forest, and your senses detect that a large unseen entity is moving parallel to you in the brush, stalking your pace, every single alarm bell in your nervous system should be screaming.
Your millions of years of monkey brain evolution should be dumping adrenaline into your bloodstream. The fight-or-flight response should be dialed to 11. You should be terrified.
Precisely. The biological imperative is to perceive the unseen as a lethal threat, yet they aren't scared.
Every single report from these hikers states that the presence feels calm, observant, and even companionable.
The fact that this presence can somehow override the fundamental human biological fear response defies our understanding of human psychology.
It is the exact opposite of every horror movie we've ever seen. We are deeply culturally conditioned to believe that the unseen equals evil. A ghost in the woods is supposed to chase you.
But the friendly or curious nature of this haunting is actually what makes it so profoundly, deeply fascinating. It breaks the rules of fear.
And it isn't just subjective feelings and anecdotes. The professional paranormal investigation community has taken a deep interest in Mount Philo. They have brought sophisticated environmental monitoring gear to the summit, and they have found verifiable empirical data to back up these subjective experiences.
Right. They brought the EMF meters and the thermal cameras.
And what did the data show?
Well, they documented highly significant EMF electromagnetic field anomalies. These weren't random. The massive spikes were concentrated specifically near the heavy central stone fireplace. And, incredibly tellingly, right by the massive glass window where Ranger Frigault practiced his Tai Chi.
The exact spots of highest human focus.
Exactly. They also recorded unexplained, highly localized temperature fluctuations. Cold spots that dropped 10 degrees in a matter of inches.
But the most compelling piece of hard data has to be the EVP, the electronic voice phenomenon. They set up highly sensitive audio recorders in the empty, locked lodge at night.
And they captured a voice.
They captured a clear audio recording of a voice. But again, breaking all the horror movie rules, it wasn't a demonic growl. It wasn't a tortured scream.
No, the investigators describe it as a calm, clear, male voice speaking in the standard, relaxed frequency of a conversational phrase. It wasn't crying out in pain. It was just speaking.
So if we pull all these disparate pieces together, the supportive, invisible footsteps at the wedding, the companionable, non-threatening presence walking with hikers on the trail, the calm EVP voice, and the ghost trying to learn Tai Chi from the ranger, we start to see a very clear, very unique pattern.
The fundamental through line of Mount Philo is that the presence is curious. It is participatory. It joins walks. It joins weddings. It wants to learn.
It is mimicking, observing, and coexisting. If you look at the vast majority of paranormal literature, it almost exclusively focuses on the trauma model. Ghosts are usually the result of violence, sudden death, or trapped agony.
An interactive, non-malevolent, genuinely curious presence is incredibly rare in the annals of paranormal research.
Which inevitably begs the massive overarching question, why? Why is this specific mountain so active, and why on earth is its energy so participatory, polite, and peaceful?
To answer that, we can't just look at a guy doing Tai Chi in 2013 or the CCC workers cutting stone in 1935.
We have to look much, much further back. We have to dive into the deep roots of the region.
We had to examine the profound indigenous history of the Champlain Valley.
For thousands of years, the Western Abenaki people inhabited this exact region, and their relationship with the landscape was fundamentally different from how modern society views it. Today, we view land recreationally or economically. It's a pretty view to photograph, or it's a resource to be logged and managed.
But for the Abenaki, the landscape was not an inert backdrop. It was a living, breathing relative. They engaged in a spiritual, reciprocal relationship with the earth. Every river, every valley, and every stone had a specific energetic signature and a place in their cosmology.
They called Lake Champlain Pedobok, which translates to at the Great Falls. And in their rich tradition, the vast, deep lake was home to Tataskok, the great lake serpent.
But it's how they specifically viewed the mountain itself that really cracks this whole mystery wide open.
In Abenaki cosmology, isolated summit peaks, exactly like Mount Philo, rising abruptly and dramatically from the flat valley floor, occupied a very specific, highly revered spiritual category. They were unequivocally regarded as sacred.
Because they recognized them as thin places. This is a concept found in many ancient cultures. The Abenaki believed these isolated protruding peaks were literal geographic locations where the boundary between the ordinary, dense physical world and the lighter spirit world was naturally thin.
So they were innate geological places of power.
Yes. They were the specific locations where spiritual ceremonies were considered the most potent because the connection to the unseen energies of the universe was so immediately accessible.
What is truly profound here is the historical and philosophical parallel between that ancient, deeply rooted indigenous belief and Ranger Frigault's modern morning routine. We need to look closely at the actual mechanics of Tai Chi.
Yes, I'm so glad we're getting into this. I think a lot of people in the West just view Tai Chi as like slow-motion aerobics for senior citizens in the park. They see it as purely physical stretching.
It has unfortunately been reduced to that in popular culture, but at its historical and functional core, Tai Chi is a deeply esoteric, highly disciplined martial art. It is the active, intentional practice of attracting, cultivating, and directing qi.
And qi is defined in traditional Chinese philosophy as the vital life force, or the animating energetic current of the universe.
Right. When a practitioner executes a Tai Chi form, they are not just moving their muscles and joints. They are attempting, through intense mental focus and precise physical geometry, to make their physical body a conduit, a literal channel for the ambient energy that already exists in their environment.
Okay, my mind is completely blown right now. Let's draw the line connecting these dots.
Let's do it.
The ancient Abenaki utilized this exact 968-foot summit for deep spiritual connection because they knew centuries ago that it naturally concentrated environmental energy. It was a recognized place of power.
Fast forward thousands of years. Ranger John Frigault stands on that exact same patch of earth. He is standing inside a threshold space built entirely out of the mountain's own highly conductive, resonant quartz.
And he does Tai Chi practice explicitly designed by a completely different culture to manipulate and draw in environmental energy.
He is, knowingly or unknowingly, tapping into a well of power that was identified and utilized millennia ago.
Here is how I am visualizing this. Think about the concept of resonance again. Let's imagine the entire mountain summit as a giant ancient tuning fork.
Okay.
The Abenaki understood that this mountain was a tuning fork and that it naturally hummed with a specific energetic frequency. Then, centuries later, Ranger Frigault comes along, and every single morning, he strikes that exact same tuning fork with the intensely focused intention of his Tai Chi practice.
He is actively turning the dial up on the mountain's innate power.
Exactly. The resulting vibration, that massive amplification of the environmental chi, is exactly what the little 6-year-old girl saw floating in the window.
That is a phenomenal synthesis of the data. If the mountain operates as a natural geographical amplifier, Frigault wasn't just doing some healthy morning stretches to loosen his back. He was running a highly specific, complex software program on an ancient, immensely powerful piece of geographical hardware.
Human rituals are software programs running on geographical hardware. That is the quote of the episode right there.
It really is incredible. And what strikes me is that it doesn't seem to matter what language the software is written in. Does the mountain care about the culture of the ritual?
The evidence suggests it doesn't. The ancient Abenaki spiritual ceremonies, the grueling physical labor of the 1930s CCC stonemasons, the focused breath of the 80-person yoga group, the deep emotional resonance of the modern weddings, and the precise martial arts geometry of the Tai Chi. They are all vastly different cultural software languages.
But at their core, they are all expressions of intensely concentrated human intention.
And the hardware of Mount Philo, with its quartz matrix and its threshold geography, processes all of them perfectly.
Which leads us perfectly into the final synthesis of this deep dive. We've laid out the geography, we've examined the intense physical evidence of the hovering broom and the dead batteries, we've traced the ancient indigenous roots and the modern rituals.
Yeah, we have to look at the whole board and answer the ultimate question.
When you add all of this up, what is actually haunting Mount Philo State Park?
To answer that, we have to introduce a highly advanced concept from paranormal theory known as accumulated intention.
I'm struggling with this concept a bit, so please explain it, because usually when I think of a haunting, my brain immediately goes to a specific ghost of a specific dead person. The ghost of a Victorian widow, or the spirit of a murdered soldier.
You are describing the traditional trauma model of a haunting. In that model, a terrible, incredibly violent, or tragic event occurs. A gruesome murder, a devastating accident, a sudden betrayal, and the intense, localized negative emotion of that single, horrific moment burns a permanent energetic scar into the environment.
It creates what investigators call a residual haunting, a trapped echo of pain.
Right, the classic, terrifying ghost story that keeps you awake at night. But accumulated intention suggests a completely different, much more subtle mechanism.
What does it suggest?
It proposes that sites of sustained, repeated, focused emotional energy develop a deep saturation over time. It is not created by a single violent lightning strike of trauma. It is the slow, methodical, drip, drip, drip of human emotional energy over decades or centuries.
Look closely at the history of the lodge. It has absorbed over 80 years of deeply concentrated human intention.
The profound, careful, overwhelming joy of hundreds of couples getting married, The deep, reflective, loving grief of families holding memorial services, the intense, quiet, physical focus of yoga groups and Tai Chi practitioners.
And before the lodge was ever built, 1,000 years of deep, respectful indigenous reverence on that exact same soil.
That completely changes the paradigm. Mount Philo isn't haunted by the tragic residue of a single murder. It is completely saturated by the sum total of centuries of profound human experience.
The mountain is consistently described by hikers and park rangers as having a warm, curious, and welcoming energy because the emotional energy that has been repeatedly deposited into that quartz battery over the centuries has been largely positive, ceremonial, and deeply respectful.
It is a haunting generated by joy, peace, and focus.
A haunting of joy. That is very beautiful. It's beautiful, but honestly, it's also kind of terrifying in its broader implications about how we interact with the world. And it's fascinating that the state government of all entities kind of implicitly acknowledges this reality.
They absolutely do, which is highly unusual. Government agencies are notoriously, fiercely risk-averse regarding anything bordering on the paranormal.
Yeah.
They do not want the legal liability, and they certainly don't want the weird, spooky reputation driving away family tourism.
But Vermont State Parks keeps Ranger Frigault's detailed account permanently public on their official state blog. They don't hide it.
They even host official ghost history programs at the park. They recognize that whatever this highly unusual energy is, it is fundamentally safe, and it is an integral part of the cultural and historical fabric of the mountain.
Okay, so I have to put you on the spot and ask you the ultimate summarizing question. Push comes to shove. Is the tall, bald man that the little 6-year-old girl saw an actual, literal, deceased human spirit? Maybe the ghost of an old CCC worker who built the lodge, wandering the grounds and trying to mimic Tai Chi to pass the time?
Or is it the other option?
Right. Or is it a localized holographic projection of Ranger Frigault's own living chi, recorded by the quartz and fueled by the mountain's energy and the massive thunderstorm?
A rigorous analysis of the evidence supports aspects of both theories. However, the overarching concept of accumulated intention leans heavily toward the latter. The entity the child saw did not enact a past historical tragedy. It perfectly mirrored a present, living, immediate action.
It was curious enough to engage with the physical world by grabbing Adam's broom.
Exactly. And it was powerful enough to drain the chemical energy of a lithium-ion battery. It suggests an environmental energy matrix that has become so incredibly dense, so deeply saturated with centuries of human focus, that it can temporarily organize itself into a visible physical force when the specific conditions are perfectly aligned.
Like a highly ionized severe thunderstorm followed by a focused martial arts practice.
Right, but ultimately, whether it is a literal conscious spirit of the dead or environmental human energy made momentarily visible, it is objectively real enough to counteract gravity, hold up a broom, and drain a battery.
It entirely reframes the entire concept of hauntings for me, and hopefully it does for you listening too. We are so conditioned by movies and campfire stories to believe that we only leave ghosts behind in the places where we suffer terrible pain.
But this story profoundly suggests that maybe we leave permanent pieces of ourselves in the places we deeply love too.
We leave echoes of our intense focus, our profound joy, and our moments of deep peace.
It reminds us that we are always, constantly interacting with the physical spaces we inhabit, leaving an energetic footprint, even if our limited senses can't immediately perceive the results.
Okay, let's bring this all together and wrap up this incredible journey. We started this deep dive talking about a little girl throwing a rock and a seemingly impossible martial arts maneuver. But what we've actually uncovered at Mount Philo is a mystery built on absolute clarity of human intention.
It's a mystery built on peace, curiosity, and ancient geographical energy.
It is a highly specific location where deep indigenous cosmology, the liminal architecture of the 1930s CCC, and a modern park ranger's quiet morning routine converged in a literal and figurative perfect storm.
An energetic perfect storm.
Yes, a storm powerful enough to create an anomaly that a 6-year-old child could see with her own 2 eyes, that could physically wrestle a broom away from a grown man, and that a smartphone camera could almost capture before its battery was entirely consumed.
I know that after taking this deep dive with us, you are probably going to look at your own world a little differently. The next time you walk into a heavy, historic stone building or take a hike through your local state park, or even just sit in that one specific comfortable spot in your house where you always like to read and relax, I want you to really pay attention to the space.
Take a moment to recognize that you are an active participant in an ongoing, invisible exchange of energy with your daily environment.
I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
We've spent this time establishing the theory that Mount Philo's stone lodge acts as a giant geological sponge for positive human intention. It recorded Tai Chi moves, it walks companionably alongside hikers in the woods, it happily joins in on wedding ceremonies.
If that is true, if stone and space can record our emotions, what unseen energy are you leaving behind in the spaces you visit every single day?
It's a profound question. Every repeated human action carries weight. Are we all unknowingly creating our own ghosts through our daily routines or deeply ingrained habits and our intensely focused intentions?
The next time you sit down to do something with total, absolute focus, ask yourself, what kind of echo are you leaving behind in the room?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the spaces around you.